The story you're about to read is nothing but God's holy truth. In the 15th century, in the northernmost part of what's now called England, a poem was discovered in the ruins of an Anglo-Saxon temple with a curious Latin marking on its first page, Subridens eques. Translated through to Old English and then modern, it's called The Smiling Knight. The archaeologists who found it said it was written by a child, a young one if they were right, and it was something quite special. So special, in fact, that it was framed on a high lectern in the temple, placed in a display of honor, like it was some holy text, but they hadn't the faintest clue why. And it was strange, the story they discovered, it was written to be read from the back to the front, something unheard of in any English or Latin literature at the time. And as a student of archaeology myself, that made even less sense. So many questions, and one story. So listen well, because I'll tell you this story. It's short, simple even, and translated from its original Latin the best I could with my meager resources and subpar narration. Listen now to the tale they call The Smiling Knight. The story you're about to read is nothing but God's holy truth. Edward was going to die. He knew it. He was bleeding, worn out on the field of war, and armor all too heavy for him now. War raged around him, chaos born from Ares himself, sparked by some lord's whims and fueled by common boys like him. Edward was never supposed to be here. He was a baker. He loved the way fresh bread smelt after the oven's kiss, and then came his lord, telling him to march off to war. And Edward loved his bread, but he had heard the songs of how knights and tournament winners were paraded in honor and glory, and he had heard that it would take him out of his poverty, lift him high and see him rise. And so march he did, to battle after battle in the snow, the mud. The air burned around him. It was grain, it was grit, it was a hard thing. He swung his axe, pole arm, pike, whatever he was given, and like morning bread he'd rise to the occasion. And so they named him the Grain Knight, for he reaped men like stalks of wheat. And when his lord finally fell in war, a new lord took his place and told Edward that he was his now, and commanded him to march again, fight again, reap again. And fight he did. He marched, though Edward fought so hard. Brothers, sisters, fathers, sons, dying all around him like sand on a beach. The clash of steel filled his world, slaying, killing, all in the name of glory. But what does glory mean when you can feel your own warmth in your hands spilling out from you? Very little, Edward thought. Edward thought it meant very little indeed. He reached out for that smell of bread, but it did not answer. How lucky he was, he thought, in those times when all he had to worry about was the make of his bread. Now all he could smell was the blood from his rotting hand. Men screaming, dying in battle for their liege lord, sitting up in his castle far away, who will unquestionably beckon them to stand and fight again. And Edward hissed at the thought. But there was nothing he could do. His story was over. It was night. The battle was raging, and there would be no song in the tavern, no poem at the tournament for him. He'd die nameless, alone. The Grain Knight would be forgotten and minor, and he'd pass over without ever again smelling the scent of fresh bread. He reached out, extending his hands in the pouring rain, and died. No, not like this. He didn't live his entire life to die like this. If he was to die, after doing all this useless fighting, he'd die smiling. And so Edward Pendragon smiled as he died, laughing and parting his teeth so wide they bled as he stretched, and he laughed, cheered, and the night watched on, as he smiled the widest and hardest a man had ever smiled before. 100 years later, a village was built in the ruins of a long-forgotten battlefield, a small thing, huts in a town hall. But it was home to the most peculiar disease. Once a year on the same day, they would host a festival, and on that festival everyone would have to smile. They would smile and laugh until morning came, and they couldn't stop. Not for anything, not for anyone. The parents would all gather their children into a circle around the fountain in the center of the town, and when the sun fell, they would have a party, dance, eat, and cheer among themselves, and from the outside it would be the brightest joy a person could see. But inside, they would not be happy, and they would not feel any joy. They would watch and wait for the first person to break, for the first person to stop smiling and cheering, because the person that did that would stop in their tracks and run off into the wild, never to be seen again. And they couldn't do anything to stop it. If they bound him, he'd escape with unnatural strength, If they tried to chase, he'd run with unnatural speed. They couldn't stop him from laughing, they couldn't stop him from moving. That person would be compelled and go alone into the wilderness, never to be seen again. It was only needed on one day of the year, one festival, one party, one person to break. Some thought the village was cursed, others simply packed their bags and left. But most stayed, because the land was bountiful, full of good soil and rife with farmland. A small trade, they thought, one person a year lost to madness, a fair trade for a paradise. And they don't believe him, but there's one boy who swore on Smiling Day that he saw something in the wild. Waiting in the night, he saw a man in full plate armor, with all but his head covered, a reaper's scythe swinging back and forth in his hands, and his face was simply black fire, molten and curdling and dancing in the night. And where his eyes should be was simply blackness, parted into a deep smile. So it went that this year on Smiling Day, there lived a boy who had just lost his mother. His name was Arthur, and he was afraid. Not because it was Smiling Day. He was 14 and he'd been through many of these already and come out the other side. No, he was scared because his little brother was still crying, and that made him very nervous. On his daily walk to the market for bread, the baking woman asked him how he was feeling, and he answered fine. The butcher as well asked him how he would get on tonight, and Arthur answered fine, but all the adults were nervous, he realized. Arthur couldn't blame them. They had no control over what would happen tonight when the sun set. All they could do was watch, and pray it wasn't them or theirs to stop smiling first. He came back with food from his journey, and there his brother was, sick, waiting for him like he always did, and still crying over their mother. With her gone, Arthur was all they had left. He'd need to pick up more ships from the woodsmen for wood this month, and the cold will start to come on proper soon. They'd need furs for the winter and logs for the hearth fire. Arthur's mind spun with all the ways he'd need to work to make up that coin. So when night fell, his mind was elsewhere. He walked arm in arm with little Adam as he and the other children left the embrace of their parents. Brothers left the embrace of their sisters, and one by one they walked into the night with smiles on their faces. Music started to play. A festive tune about a boy who missed a girl or something of the same. Arthur couldn't even hear it. Feet shuffled around, but all Arthur could feel was Adam's heartbeat in his hands. He's nervous. Arthur knew it. And little Adam, there he was, still crying over mother even now, sniffling into himself. Tell that sheep to stop his bleeding, an old man said as they made their way. He's far too young to fall. Arthur ignored him, and the children all reached the town square and made a circle around the fountain, the adults close behind. They had realized that it was better to divide themselves on smiling nights, wandering away from their families and dancing with strangers instead. Strangely enough, it made it easier to smile when you didn't know the people around you. The wind whispered eerie songs as the sun hid behind the treetops. Night fell. The children slowly looked up, traded glances between themselves in almost reverent silence. And Arthur's hand grew still. He clutched Adam hard. He felt like he could hear every heartbeat, see every raindrop as it fell. He wondered if there really was a knight, smiling in black armor, waiting in the woods behind them. And when the sun fell, his mind went blank, because his brother, his little, sickly brother Adam, had stopped crying, and on his face instead was the widest grin that Arthur had ever seen on a person before. A smile so wide it almost seemed to hurt his lips to stretch any further, and Arthur did the same. And the whole village followed, and they danced and laughed and played. The night dawned in full and they kept going. All the classic songs, forgotten ballads, favorite foods, and smiles. Wide smiles on their faces, so many smiling even through tears. He saw a mother who'd lost her arm last winter, smiling like a newborn. A father with 4 dead children, laughing all the while. Smile, he thought, smile. Smile for your lives, because the smiling night was watching. He would know. He would see. Arthur recognized some faces. Asha, the woodsman's daughter, Echo, the butcher's boy. They were all smiling their widest, but in their hearts Arthur knew there was no joy, only maddening fear for what was watching. Smile, smile, smile for your lives. Arthur danced, he laughed, he played, but he also knew that this was a competition, and all he had to do was make sure he wasn't last. He had to lose himself in happiness, in joy and excitement. Someone else will break first, he thought. Someone else will fall. And then Arthur smelled it. The scent of fresh bread. And then his arm went slack, because he looked to little Adam. God help me, Arthur thought as he fell to his knees. The smell. That was the same smell of the bread his mother would bake every morning. And Adam, poor Adam, he'd smelled it, and he was crying. The music stopped with a shiver. The smiles and laughter all turned to ice, and they stared out at the boy in the center of the village, little Adam, as his eyes glazed over and he began to run into the wilderness. People turned and shut their eyes, sad to see it be a boy so young, grateful it wasn't them or theirs. All turned but Arthur, who didn't watch as his brother was lost to the smiling night in silence. He knew he couldn't hold him down and no binding could stop him, so Arthur wouldn't watch. He couldn't lose another family member, not so close, not like this. But Arthur did turn around at the end, because he wanted one last look at the brother he'd never see again. But he was already gone. Arthur wept in the open field that night. After the festivities had ended, the others had given him their condolences, told him that it was all right, but Arthur knew it in their hearts. They were happy. Happy it wasn't one of theirs, that it was Adam instead. It made him sick, it made him angry, but what could he do? There was nothing. The smiling knight and his damned scythe had reaped Adam for himself, like he's done every year. But no, there had to be something somewhere, and so Arthur went where he always did when he wanted answers. He went to his mother. Her grave was a small thing, a bit of a rock upon a hill overlooking the village, and there she was, buried in the ground. He knelt beside her and wept, tears hitting the flowers on her gravestone. I lost him, he said, like I lost you. He tried to stay, but he couldn't, and he left her grave after a while. It was too hard to be there. He ventured home, and as he walked, he wondered if he was meant to be lonely forever, some part of him deserving it for the things he had done. His mother would always go out, and always at night, to gather plants for her alchemy. And he knew it was dangerous. He knew that there was a chance she would never come back, but she always did. She would always greet them with a smile on her face. Until the night she never returned. He reached his home and laid on his straw bed, and then he decided it. Arthur was going to die. It was too much to be alone, to be far from them. The world did not think he deserved love, so it didn't deserve him. He reached up, pushed his bed aside so he could find a rope and make a stand, and then he saw it. Under his bed, a book. He recognized that book. It was his mother's book of alchemy. She told him never to read it, but he tilted his head. She's not here anymore. He eyed the rope to his left, and then he opened the book. Arthur, it said, if you are reading this, I am gone. I'm sorry. I wanted so badly to tell you what I was doing, but it was too dangerous. I didn't know if it could hear me, but I know now, Arthur. It can hear. Arthur rubbed his eyes instantly and turned the next page. Arthur, there is something plaguing this land, this village, and it feeds on sadness, Arthur. It's been here longer than you can imagine. It's desire. It's melancholia. It's gloom. It's dismay. That is why we smile, Arthur. That is why we smile. It's always listening, watching us, even now. And it needs one. Every year. Remember what I taught you, Arthur. What is the first rule of alchemy? Equivalent exchange. One cannot gain something without first losing something of equal value. That's what it does, Arthur, she wrote. It takes our sorrow and bestows upon us joy, bountiful harvests, beautiful weather, a paradise. And all that sorrow, once a year, it's put on one person. You might not read this, Arthur. You might never want to know more about what's around us, what's in the air, but if you do, I would guess that something's happened to Adam. And so I want you to know how I died. I want you to know how to stop it. I looked hard, Arthur. I asked every one of my alchemist comrades. I searched every archive I could find, until I found something remotely similar to what we might be dealing with. At first, I thought it was translated Subridens eques, the smiling night, but I was wrong, Arthur. I was always wrong. Adam was going to die. He knew it, but he could do nothing to stop it. He was like a prisoner trapped in his own body, unable to do anything but watch as he was running faster than he'd ever seen anyone run before, and all he could do was close his eyes, because there was something controlling him, propelling him forward, and now he felt the wind. He was falling down and fast, and all he could feel was a sensation of his short life passing before his eyes. Days with his mother, her fresh bread, his brother in the woods mason. He'd miss his village. He'd miss living, he thought. He was so sad, So much misery, he felt like the weight of the world. It was drowning him. And then his body stopped in place, all at once, and he felt compelled as if by something holy to open his eyes. And when he did, it was no different than when they were closed. It was the darkest sight he'd ever seen in his life, but they weren't closed. Where was he thought? Could there be a place in the world so dark as this? And then slowly, sun-orange eyes the size of his village blinked out at him from the bellow of darkness, and Adam knew it was his time. It had no body, not truly. It was as if it was everywhere, everything. Adam was standing before something beyond him, beyond man, something cosmic. He was lost in the darkness, feeling so much misery, and the gaping maw of the depths itself was staring out at him, beckoning him closer. He walked slowly, drowned in his misery. Only a few more steps, then it'd all be over. He stopped, for there was someone holding his hand, and it was a warm feeling that he could never mistake. I didn't translate it correctly, Arthur. It's the night. Not the night, not the one with the scythe, but the night itself, Arthur. The night that watched, the night that waited, the night that falls every time a man is taken. Arthur gripped his brother's hand and he felt it. This place, this grave of man, wherever it was making him feel so much misery. Like all he had to do was let go. Like the weight of it was too much. And Arthur smiled as he looked at his little brother. Close your eyes, Adam. Then came the light. Burning from the book in Arthur's right hand, it burned so bright it illuminated the dark cavern in Arthur's side. The bones scattered all over, the bones of men and women drowned in their misery and fed to this beast, this creature that hides in the night. His mother had named it a Nocturnus. Arthur took a deep breath, then lifted up the shining book in his hands, complete with his mother's spell. The spell that she had given her life to make and trusted with him. The fog backed up in this field of bones, and then Arthur looked up because something was coming out of the book. His mother had prepared more. Gods above, it was a sword. A sword of molten light emerged from the alchemical tome, shining in the even dark, and Arthur gripped it in his hands. Equivalent exchange. The discovery that his mother had died for. The way to save his people from this fog of night. Strong in his determination, Arthur stared out at the tenebrous eyes of night, the cosmic entity intent on his brother, and he felt a hand behind him. A cool touch. He looked up to see a knight, made entirely of darkness, and hollow dark armor save for the smile floating where his head should be. Arthur remembered his mother's words. Arthur, the knight with the scythe, it's one of us, it was a human, until the entity, the Nocturnus, found him on his deathbed and fed on his misery. It made him eternal. It made him its servant. I think it's been trying to help us. When it comes to the village, I think it's been trying to stop the chosen one from dying. Arthur looked up, and the smiling knight nodded, gripped the sword from the small boy and turned to face against the Nocturnus. And Arthur thought he looked so noble, the most noble knight there ever was, with the living sun in his hands. And Arthur watched as night met night, and the night tore away at the Nocturnus' outer fog wall. The sword, it was not of this world. It could somehow pierce the tenebrous night of the Nocturnus and harm it, wound it. Arthur could tell by the way the creature was shifting and shaking. The knight knew his craft. He swung with a master's fury and dodged with a dancer's grace. He had to have studied somewhere, served some lord. He was so strong, and God's the way he could swing a blade. Arthur could have wept, but nimble though he was, the knight was losing. The Nocturnus was too strong, too vast, too unending. It needed more than hollow cuts from the outside. And so Arthur ran. He ran and mustered all his courage. And when the time comes, Arthur, his mother had wrote, be brave, be brave. The smiling knight saw him and threw it. He threw the morning sword and it darted through the air towards Arthur, and Arthur caught it as he fell into the creature itself, spinning with all the weight of his frail bones, and he started to smile, to laugh. Arthur smiled as he fell and glowed brighter and brighter. The light wasn't coming from the sword anymore, it was coming from him. He was a summer's day, the sun peeking over the horizon, the scent of fresh bread, the genuine joy. And as he laughed, morning came down on the Nocturnus, shining a radiant glow in the dead of night from the inside of the beast itself. And on that day, the sun shone the brightest it had ever shone before, and the night smiled as it made its way. One last thing, Arthur. The light was never my spell. It won't be enough. The light needs to come from you, Arthur. The light has always been you. I've designed all new merch based on your feedback, so please check it out if you have the chance, using the link in the bio. If you'd like to hear more, please remember that the story continues on Patreon, where I post exclusive content like scripts, stories, and more. Leave a like and comment if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening, and Merry Christmas.